So hello, everybody, and welcome. We have quite a number of things to talk about today. And of course, we're going to, do whatever we can to leave time for questions. Even if we go over the hour, from my perspective, the questions and answers go beyond the hour, it's fine. I'll give it as much time as we want, but we will fill this hour, no question. Okay.
Sondra, I should just ask people to mute, shouldn't I?
Oh, you're right. Yes, please, everybody mute. When we do the Q&A, we will then have each person unmute themselves for asking their question. But yes, please, everybody mute. Okay, good, excellent. All right, so first of all, I want to start with a couple of announcements, very, very important announcements. So first of all, we are doing a tour. Now, you may remember that Joy was going to lead a tour now in June, and unfortunately, we didn't get the registrations. We needed to have that as a go. Of course, it was a very last minute sort of thing. So now we are rescheduling the tour. The tour leader will be our US director, Kim Traup. Now, I realize her accent is a little different from yours, but trust me, she's a wonderful person who if those of you who have not yet met her, will absolutely love her. And she has a great deal of experience of leading international tours. Our tours are open to people from any country in the world who are English speaking. It is an English speaking tour. Okay. So we know we already have registrations from the United States and Australia already. Okay. So we know those two countries will be represented. But really all of you are invited. It is in November. We will be sending out posts to that effect already next week, and we will have email blasts going out this week with all the information. But any of you want the information already today, I have it. Just send me an email and I will send you all the information. For those in Australia, you can register for the tour through our Australian operator, Stephen Green at Olive Tree Travel. And from all the rest of the world, you will register through CFOIC in the US. We can take all currencies and everything is good and you'll absolutely love it. So look out for that. That will be in November. Also, most of you I know are from Australia, though not all of you. I am coming to Australia at the beginning of September. I already have a pretty full schedule. I do, though, still have some time for meetings in Queensland, in Victoria, and particularly in the Sydney area. I have one evening available in the Sydney area. So anybody who is interested in hosting, I'm trying to finalize the schedule. Let me know. Just send me a personal email, or you can contact Joy directly if that's more convenient for you. Okay, so that's the announcements. Now let's go on to the meat of stuff that we're going to do. So first of all, I know there's been a lot of question out there about something that has been referred to as the Judea and Samaria Law. And I know that has created a great deal of confusion. In our last meeting, I went quite into detail about the nature of our politics right now and how the government is actually quite teetering right now, and what extent that is a good thing or a bad thing. So I won't repeat that. Nothing has changed, not really. All that, except for the fact that the government is far less stable today than it was even a month ago. So most commentators anticipate that within the next few weeks, we will see either the government fall or at the very least a call for new elections. There is still that slim possibility that there are people who are trying to put together an alternative government without going to elections, but it doesn't look like that is possible at this point. So, but what has changed a bit is the extent, I would say, what the opposition is willing to do in order to bring down the government, even at the expense of looking after its own constituency. If I'm looking at the Likud and if I'm looking at the Religious Zionist Party, two major parties in the opposition, the other party in the opposition is the Arab Party. Let's put them away. They're not going to be our friends. So what they are voting, of course, they're going to vote against everything, and that's fine. They can do that. But the Judea and Samaria Law let me first backtrack by explaining the very difficult, complicated status of Judea and Samaria, okay? You are probably aware that the status, the legal status of Judea and Samaria is that Israel has never annexed the area or applied Israeli sovereignty to the area. And this is something, of course, many of you were following what was going on a year or two ago when there looked like at least Netanyahu had promised that he was going to be able to extend sovereignty at least to parts of Judea and Samaria. And this whole idea of extending sovereignty at least to Area C, which is the area where all the Jewish communities are located, it is the area where Israel retains, despite all the Oslo agreements and everything that came afterwards, it is still the area that Israel retains exclusive jurisdiction, where the Palestinian Authority has no jurisdiction anyway. So there really was a move to at least either extend sovereignty in all of Area C, or at the very least in certain parts of Area C as a process. Let's start with these, see what happens, and move forward. Unfortunately, that never happened. As I said, this is something Netanyahu would promise repeatedly. It never happened, even in the most limited place. What that means legally is that Judea and Samaria is not automatically under Israeli law. It is officially under military law, which means technically, okay, the Prime Minister of Israel is not responsible for Judea and Samaria, okay? The head of the military, the chief of staff of the military, and above him to a certain degree, the Minister of Defense. That's who's in charge of Judea and Samaria. Now, of course, that situation makes a certain degree of sense when we're dealing with a hostile Arab population. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever when you're dealing with Israeli citizens, when you're dealing with Israeli communities. And to get around that, for years, ever since 1967, a law is passed in the Knesset that basically says, and this law has to be passed every year, which basically says all laws of the state of Israel are hereby applied to all Israeli citizens living in Judea and Samaria, and to all Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. In other words, to the municipalities, the government, the governing bodies, to everything that has to do with life for Jews in Judea and Samaria. A law is passed every single year in order to extend Israeli law. And it has to be passed in that way for legal reasons, okay? Every year since 1967, this law has been passed with the support of the government, the coalition, and the opposition. The only people who ever vote against this law are the Arab parties. It passes as a matter of course. Nobody even questions it, because even people who think, even Israelis who think that we should withdraw from part or all of Judea and Samaria, believe that Israeli citizens living in Judea and Samaria need to be subject to Israeli law, not to military law. Unfortunately, the actual law that was passed a year ago is expiring at the end of this month. And therefore, the law was brought before the Knesset to once again pass this law as a matter of course, just to extend it another year. Unfortunately, the opposition, Netanyahu and Smotrich, those two parties, decided that they were going to vote against the law, even though they agree with the law. Of course, they agree with the law. They, more than anyone, agree with the fact that the Jews who live, the Israelis who live in Judea and Samaria, need to be treated like Israelis legally, okay? And yet they decided to vote against the law because they see it as a vehicle for bringing down the government, okay? Now, I will give you both sides of this story, okay? On the one hand, it may well be a vehicle for bringing down the government, because two things happened at once, okay? On the one hand, you need to understand that now the coalition itself represents formally 60 and may now even represent less. There are 120 members in Knesset. In order to really pass the law, you need 61, okay? With 60, sometimes you can prevent the other side from passing something, but you can't pass a law unless you get at least 61. Or if you get 60 and there are people on the other side that don't vote, then you can still have a majority, okay? What happened here was two things. Number one, those parties who are for Judea and Samaria voted against it because they saw it as a vehicle to bring down the government, prevent them from getting a majority. Didn't matter what the content of the law was. They just wanted to embarrass the government and make it more clearer that they are in an effective government. They can't pass laws, which is true. They can't. They're ineffective. They don't have a majority. On the other hand, those of us living in Judea and Samaria feel that we've become a pawn in this political game. And even though many people support the bringing down of the government, that doesn't mean that we want to be in a position that in another 2 weeks' time, we can't, there's so many things we can't do. We're not going to be able to renew our passports. We can't renew our driver's license. We can't vote. Okay? You know, think about this. If they don't fix this, come elections, we're not going to be able to vote in the elections because we will not be considered to be living in Israel or be present in Israel. Okay? That is the consequences of this whole thing. It's very annoying to me. I think it's extremely annoying. And it disturbs me because I once again, we see that the political game becomes more important than the substance. I would like to see all the members of Knesset voting their conscience, but they're not. But the other side of this coin is the problems this government is having that in many ways is really highlighting the problem of this government. This government includes an Arab party led by Mansour Abbas, and it also includes a far left-wing party, Meretz, which within Meretz has one, or actually two, members of Knesset who are Arab themselves. Now, the difference between the Arab parties, the Arab members who are in Meretz and the Arab party is in many ways a significant difference, because an Arab who is willing to be a member of Meretz, which even though it's very left-wing, still defines itself as a Zionist party. It still believes that Israel is a Jewish state, okay? An Arab who is willing to align themselves with Jews, however extreme left they are, still is one step above an Arab who is in its own Arab party, which is not a Zionist party, who does not recognize that Israel is a Jewish state. Now, Mansour Abbas himself made some very promising statements before joining the government, where he basically recognized that Israel was a Jewish state, and that his goal, even though he's not like Jewish or not a Zionist, his goal is to understand how can Arabs coexist with Israel in this state and make sure that Arabs have their rights. That created some kind of foundation for cooperation. But all of that fell apart when both an Arab member of Mansour Abbas's party and an Arab member of the Meretz party voted against these regulations. And they voted against the regulations, even though they're members of the coalition, which means they are really bound to vote with their party. They're not allowed to vote their conscience if their party has decided we're voting in a certain way. And both Mansour Abbas and Meretz, as parties, agreed, we are supporting the Judea and Samaria regulations. Even though in many ways it runs against the idea of being in Judea and Samaria, they recognize that at the very least, this is a technical thing to enable Israeli citizens who are living there now, 500,000 Israeli citizens living in Judea and Samaria today, they had to have a normal life. That they understand. So the question is now, it's not just a question of what the opposition did, it's a question of what the coalition is doing. Because right now, the coalition is not able to hold its people together. We have the two Arabs on the one hand who are voting against these laws that are presented by the government. Okay, so we talked about the opposition, we talked about the coalition on the Arab side, but there's another issue here. Because of the way these Arab parties are behaving, both in the fact that this Arab party and Meretz, they have members of Knesset who are not willing to vote with the coalition. And on top of that, during the terrible riots that were going on before and during the Ramadan in Jerusalem in particular, and some of the violence that we were seeing, there were statements made by some of the members of Knesset from the Arab party, from Abbas's party, that were horrific. That was justifying the violence on the Temple Mount, the Arab violence on the Temple Mount, and refusing to support the fact that Israeli army and police need to be there to make order, to keep the peace. And so some of these statements are truly outrageous and cannot be defended. Now, these are not statements by Mahmoud Abbas himself. In fact, he's against these statements, but he's having trouble reining in his party, who themselves are people with a very anti-Israel agenda. And he's having trouble keeping them in line. So as a result of that, you have now members of Naftali Bennett's party, which is Yamina. He's the ruling coalition, okay? He is a right-wing party, and Gideon Saar's party is a right-wing party. These are people that, for those people to agree to even sit with Labor, with Meretz, with some of these other parties, was a tremendous sacrifice on their part. And the only reason they ended up agreeing is because there was a promise that the issues they would be dealing with were ordinary civilian issues. None of the issues that remain in debate between right and left are going to be touched. Unfortunately, ordinary issues do touch on issues having to do with Judea and Samaria, and these Judea and Samaria rules are just one example. And so members of Gideon Saar's party are asking a lot of questions, but members of Naftali Bennett's party are leaving the coalition. So we have Idit Silman, who already left the coalition, and she brought them from 61 to 60. But now we have someone named Nir Orbach, who was one of the closest people to Naftali Bennett. He also has said now he is freezing his participation in the coalition. It is not clear what that meant. In some things, they vote with the opposition. In some cases, they don't. There are various sanctions that can be brought against them, but they're hesitating to do that. Bottom line, it's a complete and total mess, okay? So we anticipate that there will be elections. They were talking about September. All I can say is I hope they have elections, not while I'm in Australia, because that will be a problem. So let's hope that the elections are delayed sort of the middle or end of of September. But be that as it may, this is what is going on. Personally, again, what I take away from all of this, I am personally disgusted with the opposition who were voting against the Judea and Samaria laws, because I believe that the substance must always take precedence over the politics. And I was actually preparing the Torah portions that I record every week that are sent out to you on Friday, okay? And not this week, but next week, the Torah portion is Korach. And as I was preparing my lesson and what I was going to be teaching, it just rang so clear to me, the issues that we're dealing with today. Now, of course, in the Torah portion of Korach, we have Korach, who is leading a rebellion against Moses. And if you look at, and I'm going to do this very quickly, but I would urge you next week to listen to the broadcast that I will be broadcasting along these veins. It goes out in our email and on Facebook on Fridays. So this will be next Friday, not this coming Friday, on the 24th. Anyway, so you look, though, at the source of the rebellion. Korach is coming from arrogance and from jealousy. It's very clear he's saying, I'm a Levite just like you, okay? How come you're the leader and we're not? How come we can't share the leadership? What made you better than me? And it's very, very clear that he's jealous of Moses, and he's arrogant. He thinks he's just as good as Moses. And what he uses as his foundation is his lineage. I'm a Levite, so are you. We have the same grandparents, great-grandparents. What makes you better than me? Okay. What also becomes very clear from this story is that Moses is great because he's great. In fact, if you'll notice, Moses's lineage is only mentioned once in Exodus 6. There we have exactly who his parents, grandparents, etc. are the only time. Other than that, the only time we ever meet Moses, we always just hear him by his first name, Moses, because it doesn't matter who his parents were, who his lineage is, how high-born he is. You know, he's Moses with this amazing, amazing leadership because of who he is. And one of the things we know about Moses is how modest he is. In fact, at the end of his life, the Bible tells us Moses was an extremely modest man. But I find very, very ironic. Just 2 weeks, with 2 weeks previous. So last week, this past few days ago, we read in the Torah portion a story about prophecy where God tells to Moses he's going to help him out, but he's going to place his spirit upon 70 elders. Idea being they will be prophesying as well, helping him in the leadership of the nation. And this takes place. 70 of the elders gather around the tent of meeting, and they get this spirit of God on them. Meanwhile, Joshua, someone discovers that there's two fellows that did not come to the tent of meeting. They're prophesying in the camp. And he comes and tells Moses of this. And Joshua immediately says, oh my God, two people in the camp. What's going on? Arrest them. And what does Moses say there? He says, are you jealous on my behalf? Are you jealous? And it's very important because I read in one of the English translations, it didn't translate as jealous. It translated as, are you upset or something? The word in Hebrew is jealous. Are you jealous on my behalf? And then what does Moses says? I wish everybody in the nation would be a prophet. That's who Moses is. Moses is a man who cares about the substance. He cares that everybody should get God's spirit. Everybody should be able to communicate directly with God. He will see himself as the ultimate leader if he can inspire everyone to reach holiness and to reach greatness, not so that they can become arrogant and powerful. Moses is not interested in power. He's interested in doing God's will. And he is who he is because he's Moses, because of who he is. Doesn't matter who his ancestry was, doesn't matter what his titles are. Okay, and there we have that unbelievable juxtaposition of a real leader in Moses who cares about the substance, who cares about the relationship with God, and someone like Korach who cares about titles and power and lineage and all this other stuff, and who was jealous and who was arrogant. And I just wish, I hope, I pray, I wish, if you want to find a way to pray for Israel, pray for our leadership, get rid of the ego, get rid of the arrogance, look to the substance, okay? There are so many people in our Knesset who believe in the same substance. Find a way to work together so that you advance the same values and the same substance and forget about the ego. Anyway, that's my plea and my comment today for that. Now, Joy had asked me actually to comment on something she was thinking about, and I would happy to do that, given that we recently celebrated Jerusalem Day, and of course the celebrations in Jerusalem, and reminds us of how Jerusalem was liberated in 1967. It was such a special time and gave us access to the old city of Jerusalem. Temple Mount. The Temple Mount remains such a controversial issue around the world, and you have people really who have bought into this Palestinian agenda that this is some kind of Palestinian holy site. And they forget this is our holy site. Muslims are latecomers. And in fact, even in Islam itself, Jerusalem is not that high on the list. You know, Mecca and Medina are their big spots. You know, Jerusalem is also even a latecomer to them. And anyway, so I just wanted to kind of review a main question that Joy had raised that I really would love to kind of respond to in some way. What happened in 1967? Moshe Dayan, of course, was the military hero. He liberated Jerusalem. He liberated Hebron just afterwards. And in both cases, he did something that was later seen as an enormous mistake. When you get on the Temple Mount, there you have the Waqf. The Waqf is the Islamic trust, and they are a religious, not a political body, okay? And they were there, the Waqf, and of course they were extremely concerned. And Moshe Dayan goes to the head of the Waqf there, and he says, not to worry. The Waqf came and handed him the key to the mosque, and he gave him back the key, and he said, I am not going to be interfering on the way you handle this religious site, okay? He did the same thing in Hebron. When the Arabs, actually all of Hebron fell without a shot. The Arabs in Hebron were convinced that the Jews are coming back and they're going to now avenge the murders, the brutal murders of Jews by Arabs in 1929. And they were expected to be slaughtered. And so they said, okay. And they put out white flags, and the Israeli army marched into Hebron and didn't fire a single shot. The city fell in their hands. Again, the same thing. The head of the Waqf, who is in charge of the tomb of the patriarchs, which is a mosque. That structure up there, they took over as a mosque, during the Muslim conquest, and came to hand them the key. And he says, "No, we don't want to interfere." But again, Moshe Dayan did do something completely different as well in Hebron, because it was very clear to him that the Jews are going to have full access to the tomb of the patriarchs. And indeed, there was a set of staircases that went up to the entrance of to one of the entrances to the tomb of the patriarchs. And it was a place where Jews were allowed to go only up to the seventh step. And if they went any further, there was always some Muslim there that was literally kicking him off the stairs. And Jews were not allowed entry. And he looked at these steps and he said, "These are steps of shame." And he ordered the steps completely destroyed. You can't even go in that way. Okay. And instead made the other entrance, the main entrance, Jews welcome to enter at all times. Okay. So in Hebron, it wasn't so bad. And in fact, for most of the years, the Jews and the Arabs prayed. Both of them could go into the Temple Mount, into the tomb of the patriarchs. Wasn't the same in the Temple Mount. What happened in the Temple Mount? So first of all, it's fairly clear to me, Moshe Dayan was a very secular man. He had very little understanding of anybody's religion, not the Muslims and not the Jews. He did not understand how deeply passionate and core this Temple Mount is to the Jewish faith. He particularly didn't understand the connection between religion and politics for Muslims. I believe that when he handed the keys to the Waqf, he saw them as the guardians of a holy place, in the same way as you would see the people who open the gates and close the gates of the church, make sure it's clean, make sure people act with decorum, okay? And if they didn't want to let non-believers into their mosque, he didn't care. I don't think he saw it as becoming, in their minds, political sovereignty over the Temple Mount, an anchor of Muslim control of the Temple Mount, okay? From a security and strategic point of view. Now, there was another thing that was happening that had to do with the Temple Mount that didn't happen anywhere else. We believe as Jews that the presence of God, that special Shechina, as we call it, the presence of God, which was in Jerusalem and in the Holy of Holies, specifically in the temple and in the temple as a whole, never left. So that for us, in the same way that we know from the Bible that the Holy of Holies is off limits, nobody can enter the Holy of Holies except for the high priest on the Day of Atonement, and that people entering any part of the temple have to do so only after a process of purification. They cannot just go if they've come in contact with a dead body or whatever. They just can't go anywhere they want, into the temple. It's not allowed. People have to be purified. And today, for example, everybody's come in contact in one way or another with a dead body. Even if you've gone into a hospital, someone has died in there, okay? We don't have a red heifer. We can no longer purify ourselves in that way. Because the rabbis were not able to determine at that point which part of the Temple Mount is where the temple actually stood and which part was outside the outer, the gates of the temple, they therefore felt it was just wiser to say no Jews can go on the Temple Mount, because they were very concerned about this issue of running afoul of the very strict purity laws that God himself set down for us in the Bible. Later on, it was Rabbi Goren. He himself was the chief rabbi of Israel. Before he was the chief rabbi of Israel, he was the chief rabbi of the IDF, and he himself was there when they liberated the Temple Mount. And he later on did extensive research and came out with a determination. These are the places where Jew can go. These are the places where Jew cannot go. And more in recent years, especially as we have seen the Muslims attributing this idea of religious control of their mosque to political control and statements about who the Temple Mount really belongs to, when we see they're using this against us today, more and more rabbis are encouraging people to go up to the Temple Mount, but only to follow the paths, to go in the places where it is determined the temple itself was not located. And of course, Jews are also going up after they have prepared themselves spiritually after they have gone to the ritual bath, and they've done anywhere they could to prepare themselves for this encounter with what we believe is the closest you can get to God's Spirit. So I just wanted to kind of explain how that came about, how unfortunately certain innocence in the way things were handled in 1967 was manipulated by the Arabs to work against us, so that today you have people saying, oh, the Temple Mount, that's an Arab mosque. Ridiculous, ridiculous. Our tolerance for their religious prayers should never be taken as a statement that it is not ours. It is ours, no question. So that's that little thing. Now, we are moving along, and I want to, as always, share with you a little bit about a community, just to kind of, talk to you about one of the communities I recently visited. Last week, I had a wonderful visit in Toccoa. Have any of you been to Toccoa? Okay, I see, Tom, you've been to Toccoa. Wonderful. So Toccoa is a lovely community just south of Jerusalem. It used to be that the only way to get to Toccoa was through this rather convoluted road that came down from Jerusalem to the area of Efrat, and they had to go all the way around to get to Toccoa. But today, thankfully, there's a relatively new road, and the getting from Jerusalem to Toccoa is only about 25 minutes. So that makes it much easier. Toccoa as a community is very old. I mean, one of the older ones of the communities. I mean, it was founded in the late 70s or early 80s, and it was initially founded by a group of immigrants to Israel, both from North America and from the former Soviet Union. And we're talking about immigrants who came in the late 70s, not all these masses of people that came in the early 90s when the Soviet Union itself collapsed, but the people who struggled for years and were considered prisoners of Zion. If you remember what that term meant, these were people that came out at great risk to their lives and to their freedom, declaring that they were Zionists, that they were Jews, and they wanted to move to Israel. And what would happen is in the Soviet Union, they would immediately get fired from their jobs, thrown out of universities, their professional licenses stripped. They were left to work at the most menial of jobs, and very often arrested and jailed on trumped up charges. The only crime being saying, we are Jewish, we are proud to be Jewish, and we want to move to Israel. In the late 70s, because of pressure that was brought on Russia by the United States, including a boycott of wheat, which at that point Russia needed desperately, the Russians did allow a certain number of Jews to come to Israel. And so the ones that came to Israel in those years were, for the most part, real diehard Zionists. They really had suffered, they had paid the price, and they really wanted to come to Israel. So we have these two groups of people that come from Russia, people come from America, very devoted to Zionism, to Israel, and saying, we want to start a new community, and what better place than in Judea? And they went to Toccoa. Toccoa itself is mentioned in the Bible as Amos the prophet's birthplace. They identified the area. How did they know? Because right next to Toccoa today is an Arab village called Toccoa. And you know that very often the Arab names of their villages very often serve to preserve the identity of what would have been in that area or nearby an original biblical town. And that's how they knew the area of Toccoa. So they established this community there. It is right near the Herodian, which of course is this huge mountain where Herod built his summer palace. And so it's a very significant area. Toccoa itself, starting with its origins, has always been a very eclectic kind of place. It has never been defined as either religious or secular. It just welcomes everybody. The early people who settled there were a combination of religious immigrants, mostly from the United States, secular immigrants, mostly from Russia, okay? And since then, all kinds of combinations happened, including that some of those Russian Jews became religious. But it's really a community that has this whole span of types of Jews, speaking different languages. Of course, they were joined by native-born Israelis, by Sabras, and so, you know, everybody's there, and they've come from many different places now, very welcoming to immigrants, but also very welcoming to all kinds of people. It's a community that by definition doesn't like to define itself. So as a result, it's a lot of people that don't like to be put in categories. They don't want to say, oh, you're French, you're religious, you're an engineer. They don't want any category. So as a result, you have a lot of people who are artists, because artists really push the boundaries. Artists like to explore all kinds of stuff. And it's a very interesting combination, because a lot of the artists are religious. Very often artists are not religious because they, it's seen as something that's against religion. No, these are people who are exploring their most deepest spiritual values through art. They're musicians. There are all kinds of people there. It's a really eclectic group of people. A few years ago, the community came to us and said they would really like to establish an art center, art not just in physical, painting art, but all kinds of the arts, music, sculpture, all kinds of creating of different things, and of course paintings and whatever, and computer and graphics, you name it, anything that could be loosely defined as art. They wanted an art center. There would be a home for the artists of Toccoa. And we actually were able to find a donor who this really spoke to them, and we were able to help them set it up. And I was just there, and to provide support along the way for its expansion, etc. So last week I was there, and I actually was with the person who had donated a good part of the money for the center to begin with. So she herself is an artist, so it was very meaningful to her. We had such a lovely visit, and you see there people who are, there was musicians, their little chamber orchestra that was playing as we came in. You had people selling jewelry that they had made. You saw pottery that someone else had made. Somebody is making musical instruments. The person who makes lutes by hand, he carves and creates a lute, like that old-fashioned kind of guitar or whatever you would call it. And just so many other things. It was so lovely. And at the same time, one of the artists takes us out to the edge of Toccoa and showing us the Haritun Valley down below, where unfortunately quite a number of years ago, 2 children were murdered by Arab terrorists as they were exploring the caves down below. These same caves are places, the reason it's called the Haritun Valley, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this man whose name was Haritun. He was a monk at very early Christianity. Okay, and he was one of the first who created this idea in early Christianity of a life of an ascetic life, to go off and meditate and pray, what became the beginning of monasteries. Okay, he was this first fellow who did it, and he was in that area because there's lots of caves, and that's why it's called the Haritun Valley. And in the same place, you see, this is the area where Amos would have grazed his sheep and his cattle. It is right there, and you see it. You see Herodium, you see Jerusalem. So there we were, very much celebrating what Toccoa has become, and at the same time feeling very connected to the roots of Toccoa and to the roots of the area. So that's just a little bit on one of the communities, and of course we would love for you to come. I'll just remind you again that we have this tour going. We are going to be sending out emails about that this week. Look for that. Lots of information. It's in November. And please let me know if you want that information before you get it, or you don't get the emails. Let me know. Send me a personal email. I'll send you all the information. Registration has already begun. We have already people registered, both from Australia and from the United States. We welcome anyone who speaks English from anywhere in the world to join this tour. And I think I finished what I wanted to say, and I want to open it up to you guys. Any questions? This is your opportunity. Unmute yourself before you ask a question. Anybody? Yes, Derek.
When you're there, did you notice any sycamore figs? Amos worked with sycamore figs.
I don't know what a sycamore fig is. A fig is that the name of the fig tree? Because there are fig trees.
Yeah, it seems to be a different sort of fig tree, but I'm not sure what it is.
There are fig trees. There are fig trees in Toccoa. There are fig trees all over the area. Fig trees grow very well in the mountains of Judea and Samaria. It's the place most appropriate for that. Dates, on the other hand, dates have to have a much hotter climate, and so date palms are growing in the Jordan Valley, places like that, very hot. But fig trees, yes, there are fig trees in Toccoa. But that's wonderful that you share that with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else with a comment or a question?
I was just going to
Hello.
say,
Yes, Ian.
I was just going to say that yes, Amos was a sycamore tree herder or shepherd of some kind, because they would have to manually pollinate them, because there used to be an insect that died out. So what they had to do was to prick each of the fruit of the sycamore to make it reproduce. And obviously, when you go to Israel, we see a lot of sycamore trees there. And so it's one of the things that we love to show people when they go on tour to the biblical gardens where all the native trees and herbs of Israel are. So yeah, the other guy was right. Amos was famous for looking after sycamore trees.
Okay, but
Thanks.
sycamores
Thank
have
you.
figs? Sycamores have figs?
Yeah, they have like a small fig-like fruit. Yes.
But okay, but because it's not a fig tree then. It's a different tree.
That's right. It's not a fig tree.
Yeah.
I see.
No.
I see. I got it. Okay. I'll have to,
That's
I don't know what a
brilliant. Thank-
sycamore tree is in Hebrew. I'd have to check that out and then find out. But okay, great. Thanks for that. Hillary, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I had a moment where I wasn't totally focused, and then I really wished I understood what you said. You were talking about the Temple Mount,
Right.
and how the areas were designated where the Jewish people were allowed to go and weren't, and sort of leading up to that. Who was the person who decided? Was that actually a rabbi? I just can't remember what you were saying.
Okay, so yes, the person who ended up figuring out by doing research where the temple would have stood on the Temple Mount and where would have been outside the boundaries of the temple was a rabbi whose name was Rabbi Goren. Okay, and Rabbi Goren was, at the time of the capture, the liberation of Jerusalem, he was the head rabbi of the Israel Defense Forces. And he actually was there because he was so excited about the fact that they were about to go into Jerusalem, they were about to go into the old city. He insisted on, he had his driver drive him right up. He joined Moshe Dayan. He had a shofar with him. And when he went up there to Jerusalem, he blew the shofar. Okay. And so for him, this was redemption. This was the next step in redemption. He saw this intensely spiritual religious experience. Okay. Later on, he became chief rabbi of Israel. Okay. And later on, he then researched the whole thing, and he was the one who delineated the lines. This is where you have to be careful not to go. This is where you can go.
Okay, so thank you. And when they were so excited to have taken the Temple Mount, I heard what you said. They didn't intentionally hand it over to the Muslims or whatever. But how was it? It was even a conversation that they wouldn't hold it because it was their precious stronghold.
Well, again, they didn't. Again, what I'm trying to explain is this: how I see it. It was the Waqf, the Islamic Trust, that handed the keys to the mosque. Okay, and it was that the Moshe Dayan handed back. In his view, he was saying, "I don't want to get involved in running your mosque." I don't think it ever occurred to him he was handing over any kind of control, whether sovereign, whether strategic, military, any of that kind of thing to the Arabs. Political, that is how I see it. Now, people may see it differently, but that's my interpretation. I can say that as a secular person, he definitely did not appreciate the extent of religious passions, certainly not amongst the Arabs, and certainly not how the religious for them can become the political in about 30 seconds. Okay, and that was what I was saying. Okay, I see another hand. Someone identified as iPhone. Who is iPhone? Yeah, you unmute. Here you go. Unmute.
Sorry, my name is Kim. I also know Tom very well.
Hi, Kim. Nice to meet you.
I've never met you before, but it's lovely to be on this group. The first question I had, I put it in the notes to say, please, could I be on your mailing list? Because I only get this. I somehow found you and was divine appointment. But I also would be interested in the tour, although I'm not sure because I may be going to Israel in September. But if you could send all details, and also let me know if I could be an independent and make my own way from England, because it's very difficult when you join on with someone dealing from America.
No. Let me make it very clear. Our
Okay.
tour is a land-only tour. You come
right.
to Israel on your own.
Lovely.
We can help you if you need our help in planning your tickets or whatever. But we tell you, you need to come here no later than this date and this hour, and you have to leave sometime after this date and this hour. But you come on your own. You make, of course, directly from your country to Israel. And as a matter of principle, we don't like getting involved with flights these days because everybody has different ways of booking flights. Some people are frequent flyers. Some people have points that they've gathered up. Some people, especially now with COVID, have credits that they're carrying from travel that was canceled, during COVID. So we want everybody to fly and come in the way that's best for them. But if you want help from us, we can certainly help you with that.
I can do that. So that's fine. If you could send me details for that.
I will.
I put myself in the note.
Okay, great. I've written you down and I will put you on our list and send you details about the tour. Wonderful. Okay, Ian, I see you have a comment. Wait, Kim,
Yes.
do you have something else to say?
Yeah,
I have a question.
Wait, 1 second, Ian. Kim was still, I cut her off. Kim, do you still have something you wanted to say?
Is that the
Right,
same
yes.
email to get your teaching from next Friday?
Yes. I'm going to send you everything.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
Thank you, Kim. Ian, yes.
Yes, Sondra, again, is another question about the Temple Mount. My understanding of the book of Daniel, the references to the abomination that causes desolation, in particular, the reference in Daniel 12 is the abomination of desolation there is the construction of the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount. And I just wondered, which is actually also, I think, on the wing of the temple, where the temple was. So I just would like to kind of understand how you, as a Jew, and how Jewish people understand that concept in Daniel.
You're saying Daniel 12, the very end.
Yes, there's a reference to the abomination, verse
At the
12
end,
in
it
our
says, from
English
the
Bibles.
time the regular offering is abolished and an appalling abomination is set up, it will be 1,290 days.
Yes, and there's a reference to that same thing in Daniel 9 and in Daniel 11, which refers to Antiochus IV.
Yeah, look, it makes a lot of sense. That's what I say. In general, when I am interpreting prophecies in light of what we see today, I think I usually like to say it sounds right. Sometimes I'll say it doesn't make any sense, but it sounds right. It's very hard for us to know exactly, to tie a particular prophecy to a particular event. I think we need God's more direct word on that. But it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. It certainly makes a lot of sense, because there's no question for us as Jews to know that the biggest abomination was when the Romans destroyed the temple, burned the temple. You want to take over the Jews, you want to subdue us, you want to enslave us. Okay, but they then went ahead and burnt the temple. I think for them it was a political thing, because they knew that the temple was the source of our unity, of our strength, and they figured if they can destroy the temple, they would subdue us, which worked to a certain degree. But on the other hand, it was from them an expression of complete disregard and hatred even for our faith. Okay, so that's bad enough. But then when somebody else goes and builds on those ruins something that is not in honor of God of Israel, that's the extension of that abomination. So clearly that's how we see it.
Lovely, thank you. That's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
Is there? I think I saw. Did somebody else want to say something? If you do want to say something, raise your hand or say something. Okay.
I was just going to say that the original abomination unto Antiochus was that he slaughtered a pig on the
Oh, sure,
on
of
the temple.
course.
That's right.
Of course, of course. Not only that, placed an idol of Zeus.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Placed the idol of Zeus in the temple. Right. 100%. That was earlier. That was,
That's right.
that was the Syrian Greeks. Right.
Yeah, and you have the wars of the Maccabees.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So look, even before that, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, he did the same thing to the first temple, but then it was then it was a different model. They destroyed the temple. It was a terrible thing. They went into exile, but 70 years later, we're back rebuilding it.
Gesundheit.
And here it's been almost 2,000 years since the Romans destroyed it, and what we have is the mosques and the Dome of the Rock, which I understand is not really a mosque, but whatever. Anyway, John, yes.
Yeah, sorry, I disappeared. My internet went completely down.
I'm sorry.
I had to phone up the company and stuff and get it put back on.
Okay.
But my question regarding the destruction of the temple, some people would say that because Jesus had offered up his body as a sacrifice, therefore there was no more need for the sacrifices in the temple. Have you heard that one?
I've definitely heard it. It's clearly not a Jewish perspective.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. I've had very interesting conversations with some Christians about whether they think the temple will be rebuilt or not. And I've seen Christians take both positions. Some say no, some say yes. And I'm certainly not going to enter into that one because I'm not Christian. So it's not the way I see things.
Fair enough.
I will say, though, that there is somewhat of a debate in Judaism. I would say we are all in agreement the temple will be rebuilt.
Yes.
Okay. The question is, will we go back to sacrifices, animal sacrifices? And that's something that's a bit of a debate.
Yeah.
I actually gave a talk about this in one of my lessons. I don't know where, it's on our website. And it was probably at the beginning of Leviticus. I did teachings through the 5 books of Moses. Okay, and we had live Zoom teachings on that. Then I did the whole book of Joshua, now in the middle of Judges. These were all live teachings on Zoom, but they've all been recorded. So if you want to see an explanation of that, it would have been one of the first lessons on Leviticus. And you go on our website and you go under Bible study. You have to scroll down a bit too much, but see if you can find the early ones on Leviticus. Somewhere in there, I do discuss that issue. Anyway, I think we can round it up. Joy?
Sorry, I've had my hand
Lynn, you had something. Yes, Lynn.
Yeah, I've had my hand up for quite a while, actually.
I'm sorry.
But actually, I'm one of those who do believe that the temple will be rebuilt and sacrifices as per Ezekiel, because that's what it seems to say in Ezekiel. But what I was going to say was when we were on the Daniel and the abomination, desolation, I just look at some of these churches that are in Israel, and I think they're an abomination. They're an abomination to some Christians, never mind, with their statues of Mary and all that kind of thing. I mean, if they're terrible, they shouldn't be there either, should they?
One of the things that
I won't ask you to comment on it, Sondra, but
I'll tell you something. There's one thing that I do want to make very clear when we talk about abominations, and I feel about this very strongly. I do believe that whether as a Protestant or evangelical Christian, you think, some of these churches with the Marys and all that is an abomination, or whether I, as a Jew, looking at, what's going on the Temple Mount as an abomination, that in no way contradicts my belief that we as citizens of the world need to respect people of all religions, so long as they are acting as decent and kind and good human beings. I may not agree with Islam, but I would never do anything to prevent a person who does believe in Islam from praying wherever he wants to pray, so long as they're honoring the place, the people, etc. I don't like the fact that there's a mosque up there, but I understand that mosque is holy to Muslims. And I rely on God I know that God is going to get rid of those buildings on the Temple Mount. There's no question. Okay. But I know that if I were today to go onto that Temple Mount and destroy the buildings, I would be deeply offending some decent and good people who really and truly believe it's holy to them. My problem, and that doesn't matter. It's still, I can still think that the place is an abomination. You see what I'm saying? But it's how I view it, and I need to respect how others view it. All that is true until you get to a point where they don't respect us, or where they want to kill us, or where they are using their religion to justify, terrible things done to us. And I know this is sometimes a tricky thing, but I just wanted to make that clear. We have to respect people of other faiths, but we don't have to tolerate when they use their faiths to promote violence and hatred and things of that nature.
Sondra, you know what it says?
I should just say that the church I go to has got things in it which I don't approve, so I'm not condemning of religions. I do respect other people's views, but I don't think we should be doing
we
it.
all know how that is. As Ian, you wanted to say something else.
Yeah. First up, I just want to say, well said, Sondra. We do need to respect differences there. But can I just say that that Jesus did say that the temple would be rebuilt, and also it says not only in Isaiah but in Zechariah that when the next temple gets constructed, that there would be a return to sacrifice. Christians don't believe that the return of sacrifice will be for forgiveness of sin, but for a memorial of what God has done and for his promises. So it'll be a memorial. And so, it's going to be very exciting times when we see all those things re-established, for sure.
And may we all be able to witness that soon, shall we say?
Amen.
Okay, Ross, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah. Ross, unmute, Ross.
Thank you. I've always considered the handing back of the Temple Mount an act of stupidity by the Jewish leaders. I've found it difficult to comprehend, but you've helped me understand a bit more, understanding that Moshe Dayan wasn't religious. Can you a little bit more on that? How do Jewish people look on that? Do they see it as a missed opportunity?
Look, I think I go way beyond the Temple Mount. I think it was a huge missed opportunity that Israel did not immediately apply sovereignty to the entire Judea and Samaria, Jerusalem. Now, it did apply sovereignty to Jerusalem a bit later, so that from the legal point of view under Israel, the Temple Mount is part of Israeli sovereignty, 100%. 100%. What happened is when more recently there was another development with the Temple Mount, where Israel agreed in the context of the treaty between Jordan and Israel. That was in 1994, I believe. That treaty, it gave Jordan the right to comment, to weigh in on any changes that were to be made on the Temple Mount. And that doesn't offend me so long as you keep it at the level of weighing in, not giving them veto power. And I think, unfortunately, some governments have given them veto power. It's one thing to say to a government, let's say, think about it in this way. Jordan, many of their citizens would want to come to Jerusalem and pray during Ramadan, perhaps, or any other time in the Temple Mount. So for the king of Jordan to say to Israel, I want to be sure that whatever you do continues to provide access to the site to my Jordanian citizens, or even to my Arab brothers. And they talked together to make sure if Israel wants to make a decision unwittingly to prevent that or to create issues, that the king of Jordan could say, well, have you considered this or had you considered that? And I think that is what it should have been. But what happened was, many of you have seen in the Kotel at the Western Wall, this huge monstrosity of stairs going up to the entrance to the Temple Mount that's right there. And what happened was there was before that a smaller rickety thing, that was deemed to be very unsafe. The engineers said this has to be replaced. And so the plan was tear it down, put up something else, put up something nice, stone, whatever, And the Jordanians vetoed it. No, you're making a change. This means you're applying sovereignty in a, I don't know what way. We can't accept it. I think that's insane. Who asked them? Stairs? Safer stairs? Why does this have to be something that the king went through? So today we have this ugly monstrosity because what they did is they bolstered up the existing stairs. It is ugly. It comes into the area of the women's section of the approach to the Western Wall. It's just disgusting. And that's it. And I give you something even more, and this has nothing to do with Jordan, but another thing that is so insane. The access to the tomb of the patriarchs, okay, you have to go up these big stairs to get up there, because what can you do? At ground level, you're really just seeing the foundation of the building. You have to go all the way up to the foundation, above that, to get to where the building itself starts, okay? So you have to go upstairs. Now, for years, that means there's no handicap access to this building for anybody, not for Arabs, not for Jews. For years, the people in Hebron and people all over Israel have been saying we need an elevator. We need to have handicap access to this. And not just handicaps, people are a little older, it's hard for them to walk the stairs, they want to go in. For years, this was stopped because the walk had a fit. Now, how can they have a fit? It's ridiculous. Finally, and this is something that was done very recently, and I believe under this government, they had a hearing in the Knesset, a friend of mine who was seriously injured in a terrorist attack and is now paralyzed from the waist down. He's in a wheelchair. He cannot walk. Ever since the attack, he hasn't been able to go into the tomb of the patriarchs and pray. He hasn't been able to. He appeared in the Knesset hearing about this, and finally they went forward and approved, and that's what they're doing now, constructing this whole thing of handicap access, elevator, move. It's more than just the elevator. I think they're also doing some kind of a people mover to make the whole access even to the elevator much easier for handicap and for older people. And why it took so long is beyond me. But that's an example of stupidity beyond all rationale on these issues.
In the main, Sondra, I think we are all inclined to say Israel is too kind. Too kind. Look at Gush Katif. Look at Gush Katif.
That was beyond stupidity. That was just awful. Yes.
Susan did have her hand up at one stage. I don't know if you wanted to ask.
Actually, that was all very interesting. And so I just had a very simple question about the trip. I wanted to know if you were going to run another one next year, mid-year, like the one that we were going on but was cancelled.
Okay, so we don't know yet what we're doing in 2023. It's way too far in the future. So I would, that one, Joy was going to lead, and she's not able to lead a tour in November. If Joy comes to me and says, next year I want to lead a tour, believe me, I'm going to say, amen, hallelujah, let's do it. Okay. Now, Kim herself has been leading tours in March, but we couldn't do one for this past March because we didn't have knowledge way enough in advance that March would be open. And even so, March was not quite as open as it will be. So because Kim and I, both of us, didn't want to wait till next March, that's why we're doing the tour in November. I don't know what will happen in 2023. Will we have a March tour, a November tour, a June tour? I have no idea. There may be one or both. What I can't say is that the tour that we're doing in November is very, very similar to the tour that Joy was doing, with one basic change. What we noted was there are people, particularly Americans, who are less able to come to Israel for a 2-week period of time, because the Americans have much stricter holiday leaves, in workplace and whatever, than they do in other countries. And so it's very often hard for someone to take off that amount of time to come. So what we did with the November tour is we had a basic tour that's like 10 days and 9 or 10 days, something like that, and then a 3-day extension. So that enables both types. The people who want the shorter tour can do the short tour. It's not a short tour. It's not a 7 or 8 day tour. That's ridiculous. It doesn't give you enough time to do anything. But we have a basic tour and then an add-on. And the add-on is actually relatively inexpensive, okay? Because we really, really want as many people as possible to do the full tour. But we're giving an option for people to do a bit less if it's harder for them to be away for the full 13 or 14 days. So that's the main change, but just about everything else is the same.
Okay, thank you. Can you tell me what the climate's like, the temperature's like in November?
Perfect.
Yes.
It really is. It is not like now, for example, it's already hot in June. It's hot. It's not as beastly as July and August, but June is pretty hot. November is a much more moderate temperature. You've come away from the summer completely, but you're not yet into winter. You have very little rain in November typically. And so your temperatures can range from a high of 15, 16 to a high of 23, 24. So it's a very nice, centigrade. So it's a very nice, range. Well, it depends, but it's cold in the sense that during the day you would need a sweater. At night in Jerusalem, you would probably need a jacket, but you will have days of 24, 23, 24 degrees when you go out in a lightweight shirt and enjoy the sun. So it really is beautiful. But if you really want hot weather, then you're going to prefer June, July, August, maybe beginning of September. But November, we try to cut it in because most people can enjoy the November weather. I find, for example, when Kim comes in March, she thinks the weather's wonderful. I think it's a bit too chilly. November's warmer than March.
Wonderful.
We better let you go, Sondra. We're over time, but yes, I know we've all enjoyed that. Very informative yet again. Mine of information and inspirational as usual. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Bless you.
Toda rabba.
Thank you, Sondra. Bless you.
Toda
Shalom. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Toda rabba. Laila tov.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below as well as on the notification bell, and that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you and have a wonderful day.